Good afternoon, Prynawn da croeso cynnes I chi gyd. My name is Jason Mohammad. I'm your host for today's event. Cardiff boy, just a little bit of a bio here. Cardiff boy, very proud to say I'm also a Cardiff University alumni, also now one of the honorary fellows and a pro-chancellor at Cardiff University. It's great to be here. So my role in the SAFE system is the title we've given this event. SAFE system approach is a comprehensive framework for road safety, aiming to eliminate death and serious injuries on roads. We're also using Slido as well, okay? So this is essentially a Q&A session. We want as many of you to get involved, asking some questions to our panel here. So basically, this event acknowledges that humans make mistakes and are physically vulnerable. Also aims to shift the focus from preventing all crashes to preventing severe outcomes when they occur. The principles of the SAFE system are as follows. Number one, death and serious injuries are unacceptable. Human error is inevitable. Humans have limited physical tolerance to crash forces. We all have a role to play. Today's session, just want to say a few thank yous. Diolch yn fawr iawn to Cardiff University School of Medicine, with support from South Wales Fire and Rescue, key event in the calendar of Project Edward, which stands for Every Day Without a Road Death. The Edward team are here filming and will be presenting this online to a professional audience on the 4th of March at 11 o'clock. So we have an hour to debate and discuss a whole range of topics. I'm now going to give each of our panelists 2 minutes to introduce themselves and highlight their own role within the SAFE system. They are Kirsty Williams, Dean Loader, Dr. Beth Barton, and Detective Inspector Rich Jones. Please give them a very warm welcome. Thank you. Kirsty, to you first, please.
Thank you, Jason. Good afternoon, everybody. As Jason said, my name is Kirsty Williams, and I am a commissioner at the South Wales Fire and Rescue, placed there by the Welsh Government to oversee a transformation in both the culture and the governance of the fire service. I also am Vice Chair of Powys Teaching Health Board, the only health authority in the whole of Wales which doesn't have an emergency department. So we plan and commission services from population of Powys. But the reason I'm here on the panel, I think, is because to provide a political overview. So I'm a recovering politician. For 22 years, I was a member of the Senedd, the last 5 of which I was a minister in the Welsh Government. I was the Minister for Education. So that's me.
Thank you, Kirsty. In fact, I can remember interviewing Kirsty the first night when you were, I think, in the Assembly. First night on BBC Wales?
1999.
1999. Wow. Lovely to see you, Kirsty. Thank you very much indeed. Dean, please.
Thank you, Jason. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here today just to share some of these experiences with you all. My name is Dean Loader, so I'm Assistant Chief Fire Officer for South Wales. I've got over 30 years experience of operating within the Fire and Rescue Service. Double-hatted really in terms of what the role that I undertake. So I'm the Director for Service Delivery, which means that I lead and I'm responsible for the operational response across South Wales. So that's taking responsibility for 47 fire stations, our Joint Fire Control, which operates out of the South Wales Police Headquarters in Bridgend, and around about 1,300 firefighters that operate and provide that response to the communities across South Wales. Throughout those 30 years, I've probably attended an unknown number of road traffic collisions, ranging from very basic, or we would call a car with 4 wheels on the ground with minimal injuries, right up to the opposite end of the spectrum, where we are dealing with numerous casualties in very, very complex and technical scenarios, where we have to provide the technical expertise, but more importantly, how we liaise with the other agencies, the other partners, Blue Light Services, people like yourselves at these scenes to make sure that we're providing the best care for those individuals involved at those scenes.
Thank you, Dean. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Dr. Beth Barton, you go next, please.
Hi, I'm Beth. I've got a serious case of imposter syndrome sitting between my boss and a commissioner, because 20 years ago I was sitting where you were sitting, but the lecture theatre looked a bit different. So I'm a doctor who graduated from Cardiff in 2008. And my career path has taken me to become a consultant in intensive care in Morrison Hospital in Swansea and in pre-hospital emergency medicine which means as part of my job plan, I fly with the MRTS on the Wales Air Ambulance and have worked with multiple other pre-hospital services. And I also volunteer as a basics responder for MedSurg Wales on behalf of the Welsh Ambulance Service NHS Trust. But between those, over the last 7 or 8 years, I've probably been to over 250 serious and fatal road traffic collisions in various settings. As part of my role as well, I chair of the curriculum committee, sorting out and all of the pre-hospital emergency medicine training through the Faculty of Pre-Hospital Care in Edinburgh, and teach on the national course there. So most of the doctors in the UK who work on the air ambulance services come through our training and examination system. And then in my spare time, because that's not enough and I like to have more than one helmet, I'm also an operational firefighter, hence why he's my boss. So I'm a crew manager in an on-call station in South Wales. So you see that side of it as well.
Amazing. Thank you, Beth. And Detective Inspector Rich Jones.
Hi everyone, thanks Jace. I'm Detective Inspector Richard Jones of South Wales Police. I've been a police officer now for 29 years, and over the last 9 years I've been investigating fatal road traffic collisions. In the time of the unit, I've investigated probably close to 250 to 300 fatal road traffic collisions. So vast experience of what causes these incidents and the aftermath of them. I'm also in charge of the family liaison officers. These are dedicated cops who will embed themselves with the families and lead them through the process of the investigation. So I hear the stories of trauma the families are going through as well, and the issues they face. So got a bit of experience all on that.
Great stuff. A brilliant panel. Thank you, Rich. Thank you very much indeed. Diolch yn fawr iawn. So basically already I can see some questions coming in. So thank you very much indeed. Do use Slido and just raise your hands if you have a question and then we'll get the microphone to you in the auditorium. First of all, I'm going to kick off by asking, let's go in that same order. Kirsty, let's start with you, if I can, please. Our first question, do the panel feel it's right to have moved away from shock tactics when it comes to promoting road safety for young people? Kirsty.
Gosh, I don't know whether it's right or not, but what I do know as a mother of 3 girls who are now 22, 20 and 18, that transition into driving is one of the most terrifying things that happens to you as a parent. And I live in mid Wales where there is a paucity of public transport. So kids have got to learn to drive really early on because that's the only real way of getting around. And I think for me as a parent, because I don't know what the public health evidence would suggest as the most appropriate way, and trying to get through to them about their own responsibilities when they're driving, but also their responsibilities as a passenger in cars which their friends are driving is a really, really important thing to do. And we know that young people's perceptions of risk are really, really off kilter. We also know that their brain chemistry doesn't fully develop until they're at least 25 years old. So their capacity for taking, uncalculated risks is immense. So we need to take that into consideration. And one of the things that I did when I was the Education Minister is introduce a new curriculum for Wales. And there's lots of angst about whether we teach science correctly or not. But one of the new things in the curriculum is the element of health and well-being and actually decision-making. And risk is part of that curriculum going forward. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to broaden the curriculum out to more than just academic subjects. It's about having skills, life skills, to navigate your life correctly, and risk management skills and thinking through about risk behaviors and what you do as a human being, how that impacts upon you and other people is a really important life skill to give individuals, whether that's in risk with their relationships or risks with their drug or alcohol taking, or whether it's driving or being a passenger in a car. So I think what's really important is to listen to young people about actually what is going to make the difference for them in changing their behaviour. And I have to say, my own personal experience, a bit of blackmail. My daughter very naughtily went out one evening didn't tell us the truth about where she was going, and then didn't come home, which led to my husband and I leaving the house at 5 o'clock in the morning to ride the byways of Powys because we were terrified that she was in a ditch somewhere. When she did surface the next day, what really worked for her, I said, can you imagine what it took your dad to get out of bed that early in the morning to drive, how terrified your dad was? And that's what made her cry. And that is what made her reflect on her behaviour, was actually her impact. So I think you just got to listen to young people and think about what was going to make them, motivate them to do the right things.
Yeah, very good. Glad she was okay. Lots of questions coming in. Thank you. Dean, what do you think? Because you and I were chatting earlier, and we come from an era where the television adverts had a lot of shock tactics in, back in the early 80s. I was going to say late 70s, but that would really age us all. But into the 80s and 90s, where TV commercials were pretty graphic, weren't they?
They were. And you know what? I think when the video was playing, I was just looking around the auditorium in terms of expressions, because I think some of the images that you see there, you could turn in quite distressing in terms of the impacts that they have. So I think from a personal perspective, since Kirsty, I'm a father, teaching my son to drive as a 17-year-old and going back to those experiences, but with my background, the professional capacity that I have, and those experiences of talking to my son in around some of those experiences, and they can be quite hard-hitting. But then I think from an educational perspective, for us as a professional body and as an emergency service, we probably changed tact over the years in terms of what our shock tactics are. Because I can remember delivering educational talks to Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2, 3 pupils, etc., and showing videos in around Domino and everything, some of these other partnership videos that we got. And they can be quite hard-hitting, and individuals will take different perceptions on what that risk looks like. But I think the educational piece and having a blended approach in terms of probably toning down the shot tactic almost, but delivering it in an aspect that people will understand, and they can take in that information with Kirsty. I think generational society changes, meaning that we have to have a different approach to some of these things.
Beth, what do you think? Are we doing the right thing by moving away from shock tactics?
I agree. It's something that's really difficult to quantify, isn't it? And I agree with Dean. I was looking around, and it was interesting seeing some of the expressions in the room. And I remember some of those were clips from some adverts that I remember when I was a child. I think a lot of it as well is around it being personal sometimes for people. That when you're saying with, your child reacting to when you said about how his dad felt about it. I still vividly remember when I was a 18-year-old who'd left school. I was working as a bed manager in a hospital to earn money to pay to come to medical school. And I worked evenings and weekends. And I remember coming in one day, and the night before they'd had a major incident standby. And we were all like, oh, damn it. We went in, we got to miss, there was all this excitement and things going on. And because there was a bus involved and all sorts of things. And in the end, it was a fatal accident. But we as youngsters at that time were excited about what would have happened. And I went home that night, and there was a message waiting for me at home. One of the girls who I was at school with was driving the car that hit the bus head on and being killed outright in the accident. And that was the time that it hit me that actually every incident that every one of us goes to and responds to, every shock tactic, every video you see, every patient, there's a story and a family on the end of. And how you get that across to people without everyone going through an experience is really difficult.
Yeah, very, very difficult. Rich, what do you think?
Yeah, there is research out there that shock tactics don't work because it can sometimes create an atmosphere of you being told what to do isn't necessarily the right way of going about things. I think personally, it's not one cut fits all. You can make a shock tactic video for some people and they will have 100% effect and 0% effect on others. I think a lot of the research I read recently suggests of having consultation kind of groups with young people to see what young people think is the best way of educating each other of how to drive safely. You come up with the answers almost with some steers and guidance from professionals. So I think it's not quite set in stone just yet. And I think there's a lot of work to be done in it. But as we mentioned, the short tactics on TV, I can remember them myself. They affected me. They really did. So it depends on the individual and certain groups. So it depends on you guys, really.
Absolutely. Just out of interest, a show of hands, how many of you think perhaps there should be more shock tactics videos, maybe targeting TV, Instagram, TikTok, X? Just a show of hands. Would you like to see those sort of things? Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. Lots of questions coming through. Just give me also a show of hands as to where any questions might be from the floor. Just raise your hand if you've got a question. We can get our microphone to you. Okay, over here, please. Let's take our first question from the floor. Thank you. I've got lots on Slido as well, so we'll keep them coming. Thank you.
So now that we have less shock collar tactics, what do you think is the best way to achieve and promote safe behaviour in young drivers?
Should we put that to all the panel? Yeah, okay. Kirsty, let's start with you.
As Rich just said, I think, you have to involve young people in developing those programs because your perspective does change. And I think one of the problems with the shock tactics is young people never think it's going to happen to them. So if people are working in that kind of environment, so I think you have to do it in the spirit of co-production, really. And I think you need to start really soon, not necessarily on the issue of road safety, but on, as I said earlier, decision making and risk management and getting young people to recognise that their behaviour impacts upon other people. It's really difficult, isn't it? Because, there is some evidence that maybe a graduated licence would make a difference statistically. But as I said, if you're living in a rural area and there is a paucity of public transport and alternatives, young people feel really, really strongly that that's what they need. They need to be able to drive and take people with them. And I think the focus, obviously, understandably, is on young people today. And that's statistically most significant. But actually, we're living with an ageing population. We're living with an ageing population and we're living with people, again, who are probably driving longer and a self-certification system that perhaps isn't as robust as we want it to be. But I can imagine, colleagues in primary care being absolutely horrified if we said that primary care had to sign off on people's ability to keep driving. They've got enough to do. But I do wonder as well, not just looking at it from a young person's perspective, but how do we have those difficult conversations with older people about when it's the time for them to stop driving? So I don't want it just to be a focus on young people. Is the other end of the spectrum with an aging population we go.
Yeah, there have been discussions and calls, haven't there, for older people to maybe have to resit their test because it would have been, in some cases, 60 odd years since they've passed the test. We've got lots of questions to get through, so I'm going to skip to, thank you so much for your question. Thank you, Kirsty, for answering that. And let's skip to some of your questions because that's what we're here for. Don't be shy as well, okay? So if you do want to ask a question from the floor, I'd encourage you to do so. We like that. Okay, here we go. Do you think a lack of education on risk is the issue? If so, it's a really good question, this. Do you think the driving age should increase? Beth, you start us off. It's a great question, right?
It is a good question. I think we'd all agree that education is one of the cornerstones in safe driving. And as we've already alluded to, young drivers we know are one of the highest risk groups and are disproportionately affected by significant road traffic collisions and injury and fatalities as a result of that. It's also like a landmark, isn't it? Passing a driving test, having the freedom to be able to go out and drive, to be able to go to work. Similarly, I lived in rural Herefordshire, and as I say, I was working as a bed manager nights and weekends. I couldn't have done that and been making money to be able to come to university if I didn't have the ability to drive my £200 held together with duct tape Nissan Micra to and from the hospital to go to work. And so the risk is that by changing the availability of driving, by raising the driving age, that we then inadvertently affect some members of our population, particularly those based in more rural areas, those who maybe don't have parents who can drive, those who care for people, young single parents. So everything you do has got an action and reaction. So I'm not sure that it's the right thing, but I don't know what the answer is, if I'm honest.
Okay, let me propose this then, Dean, raising it to, say, 21. What do you say?
I think it's a great question, by the way, and I think I probably agree with what Beth has said, because I think being a parent, but then obviously working within the arena that I do, We tend to target those 70 to 24-year-olds because that the evidence and the data that we use suggests that those are probably the most risk age group or category. This is why we try to target those individuals within that age limit. However, I think from my own experiences, 17, I think people are mature enough to take on that risk in terms of what it means to be a safe driver. I think with the right type of educational packages and the engagement that's out there, Project Edward and everything else that's going on, I think there's enough scope there that we could educate individuals. One of the biggest challenges that we find, taking away the age category, is in terms of how we engage with the transient population that comes in and out of Wales. Because if you imagine living in Cardiff, you live in the Cardiff area or you work in Cardiff area, we have so much people travelling across the Severn Bridge or from outside the Cardiff area to come into the capital city. To try and engage with those individuals is a massive challenge. You can engage with the people who live within our communities via these types of forums, through schools and colleges, etc. But we can't engage with and consult and educate those individuals who live outside of Wales, but travelling each and every single day, and they are in the hundreds of thousands travelling the world. So that's the biggest challenge for me.
That's an excellent point. Rich, what do you think? Raising the age to 21, for example.
I don't know what the age is. I passed my test after 6 lessons, and first time, and 6 lessons.
Wow. You're the best driver in Wales.
Up by the highway code test, so literally 3 questions from your driving instructor, and you pass your test. Was that good enough for me to pass my test and to be in charge or motivated down the road? Nowhere near. I think we need more education for our drivers. I wasn't ready to be on the road. I had 3 accidents within a year. Luckily, not serious. I wrote off 2 cars. I wasn't the best driver in the world, but luckily they were very minor. So I wasn't ready, and I disagree with what Dean said. And I think we should potentially look at up in it, or at least give far better training, far better inputs out of certainly road risk management and the risks you pose to drive in. A hunk of metal down a motorway at 70 mile an hour is a death trap if not handled correctly.
I think
Kirsty.
I think one of the things to consider, though, is how prohibitively expensive it is to get professional driving lessons. Learning to drive as a 17-year-old is a really, really expensive thing. So the access to professional lessons as opposed to your mum and dad and learning their bad habits. And of course, there are more advanced driving instructing courses that you can take and a Pass Plus course. But again, those are super, super expensive. We're pricing out the opportunity for people to engage in better, in-car education because of the price of it all. So I think that, that's something to consider as well. It's really difficult as a young person to be able to afford to have that education because of your average price of a driving lesson. And certainly you can't. And then there's also, inadvertently, where my daughter's learned to drive, we have a lot of motorway in Powys. We've barely got any dual carriageway, but you can pass a test and then be expected to be able to drive in all of those facilities. But if you changed it, you just disenfranchise a whole group of people by where they live. So for every action you take, you've got to be careful of the inadvertent barriers you're going to put in place.
Yeah, that's a great point. And also, as you said earlier, Kirsty, it's a rite of passage. And it's one of those wonderful moments in your life, isn't it? When you pass your test as well. Right, okay, question to Rich here. Rich, how do you deal with a concerned family member in the event of a road traffic collision?
There's a lot of disbelief by family members on the initial kind of being told what's happened. I'm very, very lucky that I've got a fantastic cohort of trained officers, the family liaison officers, they are called. And their job is to liaise with the families, to explain to them what's going on, what's happened, lay out the process as we go forward. And I will make a point of meeting families as well to answer some of the questions of the more investigative aspects of what they can expect, what we think the driver may have done that he'd been involved in the fatality. But at the same time, we've got to manage the expectation because we can't tell the family, oh, this is what's going to happen. The driver's guilty. They're going to go to prison. Enough said. Maybe deep down inside, we may know that, and we put a good investigation to get that end game. but there's a lot of work to be put in between that incident and that court case. And there are a lot of questions. Basically, the family will know what happened. Simple as that. What happened? And it's our job to find out what happened, whether it be, mobile phone interrogation, toxicology reports on their bloods, etc., speed calculations, all the different elements of an investigation to give those family members the answers they want. And sometimes we can't always do it. And trying to manage that expectation is huge, especially sometimes families don't want to believe what we tell them is accurate. That is a huge, huge area of management of that individual family setup. And like I say, I'm so happy and glad I've got some amazing family liaison officers who do that work for us.
Thank you for all your work, Rich, you and your team. Question for you here, Beth. What is the most common cause of road traffic accidents?
Most common cause of it, statistically, I don't know what the statistics go. Based on personal experience, I would say the highest things in the significant accidents I've been to have either been drivers who were distracted, drivers who were under the influence of alcohol or other substances, which unfortunately you'd think these days wouldn't happen, but it does every day. And even people the night before, and going back to the education thing, I'm not so sure about the driving age, but I think that the ability to have any alcohol in your system when you drink and drive is probably something that does need to change. And people driving beyond their limits, sometimes in vehicles that they're not familiar with driving, and in situations that they're not familiar with driving, whether that's motorways when they've not had any experience of driving in it, and whether that's poor weather conditions in vehicles that are not fit for it, or whether it's just what was that Top Gun quote? Your body not able to cash the checks that your ego can, or something. And you do see that. I'm sure my colleagues would agree with me a lot of. And that is something that we see more commonly, unfortunately, in that younger demographic.
Just an add-on here for each of you on the panel. Again, raise your hand if you do want to ask a question, and we'll get a microphone to you. Yep, there's a young man there. Can I just ask you all, and let's start with you then, Dean, if I can. You mentioned alcohol, right? And you mentioned when I started working in journalism, when I started reading the news, sadly in the evening news, you would talk about drink drivers. I watch the news now. I don't work in news any longer, and I hear drink and drugs. There wasn't a thing, right, when I was doing the news back then. Are we at a point now where we need to have a look at zero tolerance when it comes to, if you're driving, there's no booze whatsoever?
I think that's probably something that I would support as an individual, as a professional as well. I think looking at my own experiences and thinking about what Beth just said there, distraction seems to be one of the biggest causes. Is that the worst now? We're talking mobile phones and smartphones and distractions. Infotainment systems, yeah? Yeah, sure. But I definitely feel there's definite legs in what you've just said in around that. So from a zero tolerance perspective, I think if you want to really, really drive down from a political aspect in terms of reducing that risk, then those are probably steps that we might need to take as a society. Because, from a data perspective, the road traffic collisions are not changing much in terms of the data that we're seeing. It's constant year on year, so something needs to change. We've changed from a rush hour perspective, 30 to 20. Are we seeing some difference there? Is it enough? I'm not sure, but there's definitely some of those other consequential impacts that we could do, I think, to drive that risk out even there.
Kirsty and Richard, I'd like your view on this. Kirsty, what do you think? Zero tolerance when it comes to alcohol?
Yeah, I think it just makes it very simple to people, doesn't it? Because at the moment, when you can drink, people are willing to take that risk. And you never quite know how you individually are going to react to that particular drink. And there's no reason for it. So I think it just is that clarity. You just don't get behind the wheel and give anything to drink. Makes it very simple for everybody.
Yep. Rich?
Yeah, totally agree. And as you mentioned earlier, drug driving is on the increase, predominantly between young people. So yeah, zero tolerance all the way.
Okay, thank you. Let's take a question.
Thank you very much for all your answers so far. I was interested to know what your thoughts were on Mark Drakeford's recent change to the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. Do you think this is something that should continue to roll out? There's been lots of pushback by communities on this. What do you guys feel about this change to the speed limit?
20 miles per hour, which I have to say, hosting a radio phone-in has kept me going for the last 18 months.
Yeah, I feel really sorry for my former colleagues in the Welsh Government because, and as we've seen, after a year later, the stats speak for themselves. Numbers of serious injuries and fatalities has gone down. It has gone down. So how do you then communicate that to a public who, as Jason said, has been absolutely incandescent about the imposition on their personal freedom? I have to say, when I was an elected representative, I was constantly being asked by communities to have the speed limit lowered in their area. And there's lots of stats to show that people want the low speed limit where they live and where their children are walking and playing, but they don't want to be confined to that speed limit in other places that they go. I think the other part of the problem with the policy has been the implementation of the policy. So individual councils had an opportunity to really look at their own local circumstance. And the variation in the approaches local councils have taken has been immense. So in places like Swansea, they would have had a figure of about 10% of the roads that could be 20 miles an hour, they've kept at 30. So they've used their discretion locally to make informed decisions. Other councils, like Wrexham, they just put the 20 miles an hour everywhere, without really thinking about the appropriateness. So I do think that there's something in the implementation of the policy. So I think implementation, the communication about it, and I think also there's a timing. We're living in a time at the back coming out of the COVID period where I think people are just generally quite cross at the idea of governments imposing any restrictions on their lives. And that's a natural reaction after what we all went through in that period of time. So I think it's also a case of bad lately also.
Yeah. Thank you, Kirsty. What about you, Beth? 20's plenty?
I've had mixed feelings on it, the same as most people in the room probably have, and certainly, as Kirsty says, with the implementation of it, I know one of the roads I drive down goes 20, 30, 20, 30, 20 in the space of about 400 yards, which just seems absolutely nuts. Equally, I think very few people, I suspect, on the panel or in the room or in the population would have an issue with it being 20 miles an hour outside a school, outside areas where it's built up around play parks and things. And we know that statistically, yes, if you're a pedestrian hit by a vehicle at 20, the chance of you having significant injuries are lower than they are if you're hit at 30. It's also not going to be the panacea because at 20, 30 miles an hour, the accidents we see that cause fatalities tend to be pedestrians versus vehicles. And so it will have an impact on that proportion of road traffic collisions. And I think that's the statistics that we've been seeing. What it doesn't have an impact on is those higher speed roads and some of those ones where we get the more fatal accidents that affect motorcyclists, car occupants and drivers. And actually, as Dean said, we're not seeing those statistics change as much as you might expect, considering the technology that's coming into vehicles. We go and cut up cars now and it's much harder technically to take a car apart than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago because cars look very damaged, but actually the passenger compartments are very good. So despite that, we're still seeing serious accidents and fatalities on our roads, and that's not coming from people who are having accidents in 20 or 30 mile an hour limits.
Thanks, Beth. Let's just round up then. Dean, you go first on 20. Rich, you'll do a reaction to that as well, and then we'll go on to the next question.
Yeah, sure. I think the 20 mile per hour is very topical and it's a great question to ask because I think it's probably a debate that we had in my house at the time and then for us as an emergency service as well in terms of what's the impacts for us. But just looking at some of the data really in around since the introduction of the 30, the 20, and the figures are lower. So, your fatalities are down by 27% since the introduction. Your serious collisions are down by 17%. And your slight collisions have been done by 29%. That's just on the 20 mile per hour road. So the data is hard to argue against. So for us as a professional service, we would be in support of a 20 mile per hour speed limit because the data suggests that is very proactive and our people are listening and understanding what those risks are. So I think the data leads us to suggest that, the 20 mile per hour is required. How that's rolled out and where it's rolled out is a different debate, I guess, and that's where the politics come into it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Rich, here to stay?
Yeah, for me, speed kills. It's as simple as that. I'd like to be able to do a job. I really, really would. But I'm not, because people still get involved in fatal collisions. So if speed kills, let's lower it. Let's give people the best chance they can, because, like I say, I want to be able to job, not investigate these incidents.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, question for you, Dean and Beth, before we go to another question from the audience. And it goes like this. So, Dean, do you want to start off with this? What's the decision making that goes into deciding whether or not to use an air ambulance to respond to an emergency? Good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, and I talked about it in my introduction around how we collaborate in our partnership aspect, the Jessup principles at the scene of Beth being, with a double hat, but in a consultant role, turning up with emails, etc. What we tend to do at an incident is in and around what's the best care, the trauma care that's required for any individuals that might be within that scene. So our role as a blue light service will be how we liaise with those medical experts at the scene. If they're not there, we will take all that trauma care in the initial stages with our own staff. But the plan of action will always be in and around how we liaise with the medical staff when they arrive to give the best care and treatment and the speediest response and extrication of those individuals from any vehicles that are involved. That collaborative aspect will come in around the discussions of what response is required and what resources are required. So from an air ambulance perspective, when we put our first messages back from a sea route, we will provide an account of what types of vehicles are involved, but more importantly, what people are involved and what injuries might be attributable to that scene. If there's no medical response there at a particular time, what that allows our control operators to do is to pass that information on to our ambulance colleagues. They will then make a deliberation in terms of what response might be required.
But all this is happening at speed as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This was within those first few minutes of an incident occurring in our attendance. However, if an ambulance or a consultant or doctor, EMS or wherever on sea, they will make that call in terms of what resources are required. But the air ambulance is a credible, life-saving resource that we use on numerous occasions, and so it's a brilliant asset for us to have.
Okay, thank you. Beth, do you want to come in on this before we move on?
Yeah, sure. So, first of all, as Dean says, we're lucky we've got quite a solid 24/7 air ambulance service in Wales. We actually have a paramedic or a CCP in the control room 24/7 in ambulance control down in Cwmbran. They can listen in to any 999 call that's coming into the ambulance service, and we can even do that remotely as clinicians off base as well. That gives the ability to interrogate callers, because we can get really valuable information from a medical perspective if we've got police or fire service colleagues on scene and we can have direct line of communication with them. But actually, if we can take that a step further from you, whoever it is, as a bystander making that initial 999 call, and we can get that information, we can start that decision making, and there's certain triggers that would make us think that there's a higher likelihood of a severe injury. Certain questions and things we can ask which will make us more likely to send either a road or a air response, or indeed even within the ambulance service we have different grades of staff who can go to more traumas. We can even now use, don't know who's heard of Good Sam app, if anybody's got that on their phone, we can actually use that live from the control room. So you phone 999, we can ask you if you're willing to take a video of the scene for us. We then send it out, it flashes up on your screen saying, get here to accept video call, and we have a live video link to the control room, and we can see that as clinicians and know what we're going to, and all of that helps build a picture of what the scene is in order that we can send the resources to where they need to go, but also protect them so they're available and they're needed for those incidents.
Thank you very much. Any more questions for the floor? Yes, there's one in the middle and one down on the left. So let's do this one first, James. Thank you, on the left-hand side.
This is more of a medical legal question, but as healthcare professionals, what's our responsibility in reporting patients who may not be fit to drive?
So, I mean, from a medical perspective, the GMC's got some quite clear guidance on this, because it's a really difficult position as a healthcare provider, because on one side you have your duty of confidentiality to a patient who may have told you something, or you may be aware of something that may impede their ability to drive, medication they're taking, etc. But and you've got a right to protect and a need to protect the public, a duty of care there, but you've also got your duty of care to confidentiality for a patient who may have disclosed something. The GMC, if they haven't already, will give you a little guidance book, which is quite useful. And that's why you need to join the ND or the MPS, because they're there 24/7. And if you get a difficult situation, you have somebody to be able to speak to 24/7. In broad terms, the recommendation is that so as drivers, we have a legal obligation, I believe I'm right in saying, looking at my police colleagues aside, we have a legal obligation as a driver to report to the DVLA if we have a condition that means that we're not fit to drive, and a responsibility to not drive. As a clinician, you then, if you have a driver, you have to advise them that they need to inform the DVLA. If they say they are not going to, and you feel that they are going to put other members of the public at significant high levels of risk, that's a conversation. And actually the guidance says we should explain to them why they need to do it. And if we just make a disclosure, we should inform them that we're going to do that.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Great question. Thank you very much. Right, sir, over to you.
My question to the panel is, to what extent do you think strengthening and investing into a better, more equitable public transport system would end up making our roads safer?
Good question. I think we should start with Kirsty because she's got knowledge of the politics of this.
Yeah, public transport and active travel, and that coming back to the 20 mile an hour things, part of the rationale behind that policy was that actually if you made roads safer, more people would actually take up active travel, so walking and cycling. Public transport, there is evidence that if you build it, people will come to it, as long as it's affordable and it's reliable and responsive to people's needs. And unfortunately, we've seen a lack of investment. The capital budget of the Welsh Government isn't massive, and so the infrastructure around it is quite difficult, especially in terms of rail, which of course is a hot topic. But yeah, I think if we could support more public transport that was convenient and affordable, then people would move to that, because owning and running a car is really expensive. It's really, really expensive to do.
And as you said earlier, it's very challenging, especially in Powys, and certainly in some parts of Pembrokeshire and Ceredigion where there are no bus services.
Yeah, there's no. Not only do we not have an ED, we don't really have a public transport service either. But so in rural areas, because of the population size, it's really difficult sometimes to justify the expenditure to put that system in place. It's chicken and egg though, because if you don't get it, people don't use it, and so it's like it's quite a difficult decision for politicians to make where to put that cash.
Unless the panel have got a burning desire to talk public transport, we can move on to another question. Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. Here we go. Another question here. This is for you, Dean. Are there any common mistakes you see bystanders make? So I don't know whether that's bystanders in terms of people who are caught up in, if there is, God forbid, an accident, or whether bystanders coming in, especially with phones these days, getting in your way, basically.
Yeah, and it's a great question. It's something that we have experienced, and we've really experienced this for a long time, though. I think I'll tackle the two elements you just talked shortly. So I think first, the mobile phone issue. So when we attend in scenes, we see it now more than ever, where we have members of the public on the roadside, filming, actually take photographs or filming the scene and what's going on, posting on social media, etc. And then that's brought our police colleagues to actually be dealing with, because at those scenes there's a frustration that comes from emergency service workers, I would suggest, in terms of our values are very similar to yours. You're here because you want to be medical experts, doctors for the future. So I would suggest today that your own personal values would include things like empathy and compassion, which are things that are really important to us as blue light workers as well, in terms of what we deliver for the public and how we want to interact and provide that intervention. So it becomes a frustration for us when we see this happening on the side of the road because we are there to do a job, a professional job, and we don't want the distraction of somebody else being in the way. The other element to it, I would suggest, is in terms of where we do turn up the scenes, but there are members of the public who are now providing care to individuals involved in those incidents as well. And that happens quite frequently because I think people these days, you'll see a scene or something will happen and you might be the bystander and observe this scene occurring right in front of your eyes. So the trauma element of that, majority of the time we see that people will want to get involved and will turn up, and there'll be members of the public dealing with somebody inside a vehicle. That's got benefits and it's got its challenges as well that comes with it in terms of how we then take over that scene, remove somebody from there, because sometimes they'll be unwilling to want to actually leave because they've been part of the scene. So we have to deal with those individuals as well whilst we're trying to deal with the scene. So there's various challenges that come with it.
Okay, thank you, Dean. 2 spin-off questions to you then, Rich. Number 1, is it an arrestable offence if somebody's getting in the way? And number 2, what happens if that person, for example, is filming something that eventually could help in a court case?
Yes, you can't be arrested. Obstructing police officer in their duties is something you can be arrested for. It very rarely happens in these emergency situations because the cops were attending about far too much to deal with. So, my plea would be to people is not to film because there's no need for it. You got someone there who's in a critical condition, as Dean said, show some empathy. The evidence that you will hold on your phone is just that evidence. So I can seize your phone because if I think you've got evidence on your phone, I can take it off you under the powers of a police hold, and you might not get that back for 6 months because the time I get it downloaded and take your evidence off you, then it can be used as evidence in a court case. So should be mindful of that, not you guys here, but the wider community. So it is imperative you don't do it just for the empathy thing more than anything, and you might lose your phone. But as Dean mentioned there, I'd seen lots of occasions where members of the public have acted heroically at helping out that scenes, and those people should be commended. So don't want to harbour on too much about the negative side because there are some fantastic actions members of the public had made at fatal collisions. Really, really have, and they've been commended recently in our world. So I'm grateful for those actions.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you all very much, Lee. Can I say thank you? Guy, just dweud diolch yn fawr iawn hefyd. Thank you so much to you all as well for getting in touch in your numbers on Slido as well. Been brilliant. And they've been really fantastic questions as well. However, we are going to end with this final question from me, and we're going to start with Dean. Would the panelists each like to give us 3 words to describe their own driving? And those words, are they the same today as they would have been on the day they passed their test? So I'll repeat that once again, okay? Get your head around this. Would the panelists each like to give us 3 words to describe their own driving? Richard's scribbling away now. And are those words, after all 6 lessons, are those words the same today as they would have been on the day they passed their test? So we'll go Dean, Beth. Yeah, we'll go along the line.
Yes, a great question. Probably something I hadn't thought about before coming here. 3 words. I would say now, from my own lived experience and my current driving style, I would suggest is safe. Like think that I'm safe. Considerate is another word I would say to explain my driving. I'm probably with an element of frustration. I'll leave it all in there.
Are they different to what they were when you passed your test?
Yes, probably. I would suggest they are. I think probably from being a young driver, passed my test ascending, probably much like many other people. And so my risk was probably different then to what it currently is. And maybe that's through the lived experiences that we had and old as well.
Thank you, Dean. Beth, over to you.
Oh, I was going to put me on the spot there because someone's going to end up following me out the car park. Yeah, you don't know at all, aren't they? Steady, focused, significantly more, and I'll go again, hopefully safe. And it is definitely very different, I think, to when I first learnt to drive. And actually as well, since I've gone back 20 years later and done advanced training as a blue light driver, my driving has changed significantly.
Thank you very much. And thank you for being honest as well, the 2 of you. Right, Kirsty.
Inability to park.
Oh, you've done it. 3 words. There you are. Job done. And were you able to park when you were 17?
park enough to be able to pass my test. I wouldn't describe myself as a great driver. I was renowned at the Senedd for turning up for my first day in '99 in my battered blue Mini, which had a smashed in front lamp because the day after the election I managed to drive into a van. So I was renowned for being this assembly member that turned up and parked my little battered up car next to all these very pop cars, and then there was my blue Mini.
Thank you, Kirsty. And Rich.
Yeah, I think Dean read my notes, obviously. First one is safe. And not when I was 17, because I mentioned earlier, I never crashed when I was 17, so definitely better there. Considerate, and this is pertinent for motorcyclists. Motorcyclists are very, very vulnerable. If I see a motorcyclist come up behind me, I move out the way, let them pass, because they are in a very, very vulnerable position. So very considerate to motorcyclists particularly, and other road users, obviously. And alert, because you might be the safest driver in the world, but other drivers may not be. And who's to say you're not going to encounter the drink drivers coming in the way? So just be mindful of the traffic around you. So very alert.
Good stuff. Thank you. Would you join me in thanking Kirsty, Dean, Beth, and Rich? Thank you very much, guys. Thank you.